Hi, guys. We are talking about the Clean Air Act today and the impact that lead used to have on societies, but not anymore. So, here we go. So, I'm sure you guys are like, Miss Clark, we have not talked about lead in the atmosphere. And you're right, because it does not exist anymore. Lead was a heavy metal toxic that, even at the smallest levels, was such an issue back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Lead was never a part of the atmosphere until cars and combustion and automobiles came on the scene in 1920. And then we got a little crazy with it. And it started to become a big issue in our atmosphere. So let's walk through this process. Gasoline engines, they're designed to ignite the fuel when the cylinder is at like this maximum compression. So you can see this little diagram here. It should go orange when we're at the top, when all that pressure is up high. That's when we should ignite at the top, at the top, at the top. The problem, however, is that most gasoline engines have this tendency to pre-ignite a lot lower. When it's actually blue, it shouldn't be igniting there because the pressure is too low. We need to wait till it's a lot higher. But a lot of these engines are pre-igniting, calling this thing called an engine knock. And when they do that, they lose their efficiency completely. So you're wasting a lot of gas in that pre-ignition, or what we call this engine knock. So in 1920s, we were like, all right, I say we, not like I was involved, but oil companies were like, all right, this is an issue. People are frustrated because our gas is not very efficient. So they started adding a substance called tetraethyl lead into their gasolines, and their gasoline became leaded. And this substance reduced this engine knock and almost completely increased the fuel efficiency. We call this tetraethyl because I have one of these lead molecules here surrounded by four of these ethyl molecules around it. And when this is added into the gasoline, it helps to increase that efficiency. But the problem is this lead molecule, this whole thing kind of just like dissolves, and now you have lead coming out your emissions in the back when lead was never in the atmosphere. Now all of a sudden it's being pumped out of every car on the roads all the time. And we started seeing issues right away. So the lead levels in the air increased dramatically. So here we are in 1920s. Automobiles have just kind of come on the radar. 1940s, we're in World War II. Now all these GIs are back from the war and they're like, I want to live. Let's get a car. Let's drive across the country. And wow, these levels of lead in the air dramatically rose into the 1960s. And as you would probably guess, lead is not good for us to be breathing in. So they started studying things and they realized that, oh, shoot, this lead causes harm to humans, especially our preschool children. We have to remember that there's no safe level of lead ever. No lead in the air is good at all. So when here we are, humans driving our cars, dumping this lead into the air, it is causing organ damage. It is causing hypertension. It is causing reduced mental function. And we're starting to actually see a massive decrease in IQ with our preschool students. So we can see in this graph here that as the increase of lead in a preschooler's blood increases, unfortunately, their IQ drops even more, which is showing one of the largest impacts of this lead that we are inhaling during this time. So, interesting fact, Thomas Midgley Jr., he was the chemical engineer who came up with this tetraethyl lead to put in the gasoline. He was also the one who developed something called CFCs. He developed this thing called Freon, which was used as a refrigerant for up until I want to say like the 2000s time. And we realized in the 1990s that CFCs, or Freon, which is what he created, is largely responsible for destroying the ozone layer. So, Mr. Midgley, he had destroyed our environment, whether through lead, through CFCs, but just incredible that one man can do so much ecological damage. All right, so in the 1970s, the US was like, all right, enough is enough. This is getting out of control. We clearly see large impacts on and health of our children due to this lead that they're breathing this in. So we need to do something about it. So the US passed the Clean Air Act, which is considered one of the most kind of comprehensive laws in the world for regulating air quality, and it was very progressive at that time. The Clean Air Act established these National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or the NAAQs, for these pollutants. These are all ones we've talked about: sulfur dioxides, carbon monoxides, nitrogen dioxides, VOCs, ozone, PMs, and then lead. They kind of set these standards saying we can have these allowable amounts to protect human health, property, crops, and like just general visibility, ozone, smog, all of that air pollution. These are the levels. And you companies need to adhere to these levels when you are releasing fumes into the air. That also established the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which was then put in power to enforce these rules. So if we find out that a company up in Flint, Michigan is not following these rules, then the EPA will go up, they will investigate, and they will make actions, or even shut down the company if it is not following those guidelines. Those of you who have followed politics in the last 10 years ish, the EPA has always been a pinch point for different governments, because there are some agencies and some governments that very much embrace it, and there are others think that they act too far outside their bounds. So it'll be fascinating, as always, in the United States as we move through one government into the next. Okay, so this shows the impact of this Clean Air Act. Here's our atmospheric lead in the US. In 1973, the EPA started phasing out lead from gasoline, and holy moly, what a drop you can see. So these are our atmospheric lead levels in the US, dropping back to lower than they were in the 1920s and 40s in the early 2000s, which is wild. And as of 2021, you can no longer find leaded gasoline on this planet, which is fantastic. The last country to stop the use of it was Algiers in 2021. This is a massive move for our planet. So, yay, Earth. Fantastic. And as you would expect, as we have phased out lead in gasoline, the levels present in the human blood has also decreased dramatically. So these little circles here, these represent the lead in the petrol, kind of the total lead used per period of 6 months, where the squares here are the mean blood levels in adults. And so you can see drastically from 1976 to 1980 how there was a drastic increase in massive correlation as that lead was phased out. But we came up with some really interesting correlations. So much research was done in correlation with lead, and this is one that showed up, I think really kind of puzzled people. They found that the rise and fall of atmospheric lead is closely correlated with the rate of violent crimes. Isn't that wild? So just as the average lead level in preschool's child's blood increased, so did violent crimes per 100,000 people. And just as that decreased, so did violent crimes. It's a fascinating correlation. Again, we can't always take causation, but this is fascinating because this survey was done in the US, but also in New Zealand and England and Australia and Canada, and they all saw the exact same thing. When lead level in blood went up, so did crime. When it went down, so did crime. No one, of course, understands the correlation between this and if there is any causation, but it is quite a fascinating connection that in 5 countries this correlation has been observed. And then we've even extended it to high school dropout rates. Maybe that is why. So, anyways, some fascinating correlations, but at the end of the day, it is great to hear that we have had a success in protecting our earth a little bit more. And we'll see what changes go from there. So, fantastic.